It later became evident to me that every fight I picked was a cry for help. I needed for my feelings to be validated. I needed to be told that it's okay not to be strong, that it's okay to be sad.
Hey, before we dive into today's podcast, I wanted to share something very special with you. And you're going to want to hear this, and it's happening from now until July 15th. If you've been on the fence wanting to work with me in some capacity, maybe you've heard of my mastery coaching experience and you're curious about it, maybe your shit's coming up and you keep telling yourself you can't afford it or you don't have time, well, guess what? Now's the time when you're going to want to take action. We are doing a summer promo where we are going to gift you July and August. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I've noticed some interesting patterns with our children's behavior post-pandemic world and also watching women burning out at an alarming rate. And I am not here for all or nothing strategies. I'm here for the long game. This takes time. This takes patience and this takes consistency. And you need support. So if you don't have a plan on how you're going to reverse engineer how you want to feel in your personal and professional life, I want you to head on over to heatherchauvin.com/summer and check out our mastery coaching experience. Because if you apply before July 15th, you're going to be gifted. Yes, you're going to be gifted 2 additional months, which is over a $2,000 value. You can feel good and have your cake and eat it too. heatherchauvin.com/summer.
It was the morning of January 1st, 2019. I'll never forget it. My husband had worked overnight and was upstairs sleeping. I was downstairs having my coffee when the call came in. It was my mother. My father was gone. Just like that. Here one day, gone the next. I was 6 months pregnant with my first child, and I felt as though I had just gotten sucker punched in the gut. My husband came flying downstairs and later shared that he'll never forget the blood-curdling cry that came out of me. I was in complete shock, riddled with both sadness and fear. So much fear. That moment would forever change me. I just didn't know it yet. There were so many events that transpired that year that was just one trigger after another. We learned that my father's passing was what could be described as traumatic and unjust, leading us to partner with a settlement attorney, which turned into a 2-year process only to result in a case that could not be brought to fruition. I was left to pick up the pieces, helping my mother, now a widow, get back on her feet and learn how to live again on her own. My company was being acquired while I was on maternity leave, struggling with breastfeeding my newborn child, forcing me to find other employment so that we wouldn't be left without health insurance. But despite it all, we had welcomed the most beautiful baby girl in this world. It should have been the happiest year of my life, and yet it was instead an exasperating year. Then came 2020, complete with its own set of challenges. My daughter was absolutely the shining light that kept me going, that kept me strong. But that's the thing. I was shielded by an armor of strength when inside I was broken beyond belief. Only I didn't allow myself to truly feel my sadness. I didn't allow myself the time to grieve my father, and I didn't allow myself to consider that I may be suffering from postpartum depression. Everyone kept telling me how strong I was, so I figured that's how it had to be. I was doing it the right way, and I'm using air quotes here. My armor of strength quickly turned into an armor of anger. I used anger to fuel my energy, to keep me going, to keep me strong. I used anger to hide my pain. I hid behind my anger, so much so that it became my identity. I was irritable, short-tempered, impatient, moody. I was unhappy. I would try to hide these emotions in public amongst my friends, family, colleagues. I didn't want to be seen. So I took out all my anger on my loved ones, my husband and mother getting the brunt of it. It consumed me so much that I didn't even realize I was doing it. It just became norm. It's just who I am, I told myself, and so I settled with it. Meanwhile, my husband was also shielded with an armor of strength, putting up with it, masking his own feelings unbeknownst to me, when in reality, he was breaking. My pain was causing him pain, and I didn't even know it. It was September 2021 when we had our breaking moment. I had picked yet another ridiculous fight over something so petty. I was so angry, filled with rage. My blood was boiling, my chest was heavy and tight, and I felt as though the only way I could be heard was to scream as loud as I possibly could. I wanted him to feel my anger. I didn't want to feel alone anymore. I remember yelling at him, "Something's got to give." And it did. He completely broke down right there in front of me, months of pent-up emotions, expressing to me all the pain he was in, the pain that I had caused him. He confessed to me that as a result, he was questioning his love for me and had been for some time. My marriage was on thin ice. I was moments away from potentially losing the love of my life and having a broken family. It was the wake-up call that I needed. It later became evident to me that every fight I picked was a cry for help. I needed for my feelings to be validated. I needed to be told that it's okay not to be strong, that it's okay to be sad. Through therapy, I learned that I was hiding behind my anger. I was using anger as a shield of protection. I am now learning how to peel back that shield layer by layer. I am learning how to feel my feelings. I am learning how to live with grief. I am learning that anger is my friend. When anger surfaces, it is there to tell me something isn't right, that I have feelings that need to be processed and that need to be felt. And I am learning how to love myself and give myself grace.
Thank you. What was that process like for you, Kim, to write out that moment or that story?
Oh, it was emotional. It was like revisiting that moment. I didn't realize I was resisting writing the stories. I was looking forward to it. But when I sat down to do it, I immediately was like, no, I can do this later. I was really just resisting it. And I thought, no, you need to do it. And the second I started writing, just all the emotions came flooding back. It brought me right back to that moment when I got that call from my mother. And it was, it was a lot, but I needed to do it. I needed to write it out.
Yeah. I know you've been in my world for a little while. So when you started following me, where was that in this story timeline?
It was after I had given birth to my daughter. So my father passed away January 2019. She was born in April. So it's probably around May of 2019. I started listening to your podcast. Mm-hmm. And that's when I entered your world.
And what do you think? Like, I definitely want to have this conversation about anger and identity. I think I was even just listening to your story. I was like, oh, yes. Because I remember I was actually as more of a child. I was a very angry child. And I thought that was my personality. And then I was judged for my personality because I see that fight or flight or fawn or whatever they want to say. I never identified as like a people pleaser. So people would call me feisty. They would call me spicy. In my everyday now, that's always my tendency, that when I'm triggered, I want to get angry, complete night and day with my relationships. But I can tell now that I can feel that trigger. I go to my red zone. I don't necessarily act on it anymore, but I'm like, oh, wow, you're angry. What's really going on here? And before I ask you a question, I was reading a book, and a lot of times when I'm doing talks with women, there's so much shame around anger. Like the females are not allowed to express anger. Mm-hmm. That's more appropriate for men or male, even though they call it, it could be abusive, but they're allowed to express anger, but we're not allowed to express it. So we got to suppress it and put it down. Anger to hide my pain. So I'm just curious, your relationship with anger, even before grief kind of set in with your father's passing.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much everything you just said. I think I've always lived with anger. I didn't realize it until now that I'm entering into this journey and I'm really reflecting on my life. I can see that I grew up with a lot of anger, and very similar to what you said, I had a lot of friends that would kind of refer to me as, feisty Kim, or, Kim's got the toot, or, just like little comments like that. And friends that love me unconditionally. And, I would just kind of like roll with it and be like, yeah, heck yeah. I'm like feisty, you know?
I'm a rebel. I'm a badass. I'm this. Yeah.
Kind of like shielding really how it made me feel. But I never allowed myself to look at it. And it was just a part of who I was. And then when my father passed away, I think that was the ultimate trigger that just kind of got me spiraling out of control. And that's when I really started acting out my anger. I mean, I never got physical, but it's like I wanted to be heard. And so, you know, whether it was through like a silent treatment or like just being moody all the time or like slamming a cupboard, picking petty fights with my husband, just always having that kind of like that dark cloud over my head. And yeah, I guess I didn't realize I wasn't necessarily feeling my feelings. I was more acting it out.
Yeah.
But inside, just exactly projecting it, and just, you know, so much pain consumed me.
Yeah.
It still does.
I like that you just said that. It still does, because I know we're all a work in progress, and you're literally on your healing journey right now. One thing that I wrote down, and you said this, I didn't want to be seen. And the core kind of human needs to be seen, heard, and understood, right? And I talk a lot about behavior being a language. I didn't want to be seen. And then you said, the fights I picked were a cry for help. And so there's this duality of, I actually don't want to be seen because that feels vulnerable. I don't want to be heard, but yet at the same time, I want to be heard.
100%. I think the thing with not wanting to be seen is the shame that just came with it. You just kind of feel like, you know, I kind of always had the sense like I'm crazy, right? Like something's wrong with me, but I never wanted to admit it. I never wanted to face the music. And really that's kind of what brought me to you. Because after my father passed away and I started spiraling, even before I was ready to admit that something was wrong with me, I still like deep down knew there was something there. And I had just so much shame, and I didn't want people to really see that. I didn't want like my colleagues and, you know, my friends and family, even though I think my friends truly could see it. We just never really talked about it. And then, but with every fight that I picked with my husband, I think it was just a way for me to say, like, I need for you to validate how I'm feeling. I need for you to just like, tell me you hear me, that I'm in pain and that I can be sad, without having that conversation. Yeah. There's never that uncomfortable conversation that we could have, or that I allowed myself to have.
Yeah. Because sometimes we're definitely not taught how to communicate that. And I think that's the frustrating part, because, and I know that this is not the conversation we're having, but when our children trigger us, we so badly want to know, like, why are you doing this? And they're like, I don't know how to communicate this, because we don't even know our own language. So how are we expecting an infant or a toddler to know what's going on? And we're so afraid of emotion.
Yes, completely. I see it when my daughter triggers me, for sure.
How old is she?
She's going to be 3 in April.
Oh, the fun. I'm not going to say the fun stage, the teenager. I hate when people label all the shit, because I'll tell you, being in the teenage phase right now, I'm like, you are a toddler in a teen body, in an adult body, which is terrifying emotionally.
Yeah.
I'm like, if I didn't do the work then, right now, I would be investing in a Heather Chauvin. It is next level.
You know, and I think that's another reason why I'm so open to being on this healing journey now. I mean, of course, I'm so tired of feeling the way I've been feeling. But it's even more important now that I have a child, you know, that we're growing our family. And I want my kids to be able to look up to me. I want to lead with example. And it breaks my heart to think that my daughter could also grow up kind of like with that anger that she doesn't know how to express, and that she could someday feel the way I feel. And I don't want that for her. I want her to be able to feel her feelings. And I need to be able to do that. I need to be able to understand my feelings and help her through hers.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like when we witness somebody in an angry state, my go-to now is, I wonder what's going on, whether it's a child or a complete stranger. And most of the time when I'm observing people, we judge and we're like, oh, they were so mean to me. They triggered me. They did this. And we make it about ourselves. And oftentimes people ask me the question, how do I not let the energy of others affect me? Mm-hmm. And so I'll tell you a very practical example. I was on the airplane and it was me and my two boys. This was literally like last week. So I am who I am today. Like it wasn't years ago. And we were not sitting together because hello, airplanes. And I was like, that's silly. Like I couldn't even, if I had to pay extra to like book those tickets. Anyways, it didn't happen. We weren't sitting together. My children are 9 and 12. And I'm like, well, this is not really going to happen, especially in like post-COVID times. Like we're going to be sitting together. So I went to the front. I said, hey, can we sit together? Blah, blah, blah. Two were together and I was not. So I was in the aisle. I was supposed to be in the window, ended up in the aisle. And then there was a gentleman sitting in the other aisle. And then my kids were sitting next to him. I was okay with that. But I also knew that this man is going to be annoyed because I'm going to keep reaching over him to like give my kids snacks and stuff. And he looked at me and he said, would you like me to switch with you? And I was like, wow, that was super nice of him to be nice, right? I said, sure, if you'd like to, I'd really appreciate that. And he goes, well, I don't want to, but I guess I have to. And that energy, I could feel it coming towards me. It was very angry and chip on his shoulder. Then I was literally self-coaching myself and going, it has nothing to do with you, Heather. He doesn't even know who you are. You triggered something in him and he's probably very annoyed with this airline anyways. And the busyness of this, he may actually be stressed and anxious to fly. So it has nothing to do with you. So then we had to wait for people to go by. So when it was time to switch, I could tell that he caught himself in his angry projection. And he said, I would love to switch with you. And he turned it around and I was like, confirmation that it's not about me. He's like, I'm sure your boys are lovely to sit with. Obviously, I just want to make sure that you're together. And that's a perfect example of how we are chronically judging other people based on their projections of how they feel. And I'm assuming, so here's like turning into a therapy session, but I'm assuming that your projection of anger on your husband wasn't because you were, yeah, sure, maybe you had some stuff, some triggers, but because he's your safe person.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
We project our shit. That's why our children do it to us. So how do you, and I love and appreciate that you're like in this healing journey. How do you begin to look at the anger and to let that mask or guard down and really feel what's underneath?
Well, that's a really good question, Heather.
And I'll tell you in a few months after I've gone through your program.
I still don't really know entirely how to look at it. I know that I need to get quiet with myself. I know that I really need to listen to what it feels like in my body, the physical sensation. Because, we talk about where, you mentioned the green, yellow, and red zone. And for me, it's always been green to red instantly. And I have such a hard time identifying that yellow. And so what's been important to me is really trying to kind of like slow down and start identifying that yellow. And when I feel it coming, take the time to try to listen to my body.
Yeah.
I still get reactive. I still catch myself. But at least I'm catching myself, just a few months ago before my husband and I had our moment, I wasn't catching myself. It was just like, I was on repeat, I was on autopilot, and it was just like constant. Now, at least I can, if not in the moment after the fact, and I can reflect on it and then I have a conversation about it. Yeah. So I'm still working on really identifying that anger and how it presents itself, but it's really just kind of slowing down and taking the time to listen to your body.
Yeah. And I think the important part around that is that it's consistent, like it's consistency, it's time, and it's habitual, because we're so conditioned to want the quick fix. Like, I've talked about this. How many times do I have to talk about it? But it's a habit. And so the emotional strength or the emotional, I don't know, skills that we gain are habitual. And I remember when I was trying to stop yelling as a parent, like, I can't tell you the last time I yelled. I don't very often even get an argument with my husband. I can see it go into yellow a little bit sometimes, or orange. I would call it orange, not even red. It's like, and then we just turn it around. But with the kids, you know, it's also a cultural belief that our children piss us off and they make us angry. I'm like, no, they're triggering anger that's already within you. Mm-hmm. They're just triggering your go-to response. So yeah, it's habitual, it's consistent. And I guarantee you 6 months from now, a year from now, if we were having a follow-up conversation, you're going to be like, oh my God, I'm a different person. I didn't even know that this was possible. But you're already seeing change. You're already seeing that like change is possible, where we stay stuck in these habit loops forever.
Yes, I am seeing the change. And you know, what's even more surreal is that my husband's seeing the change in me.
I think that's crazy. Well, not crazy, good.
It's crazy good. Yeah. Yeah. And so to your point, I can't wait to see where I am 6 months from now. I'm, you know, rolling up my sleeves and I'm ready. I'm just ready to dive in. I mean, I did dive in, but
so you're primed and ready to go. So let's talk about identity. And the statement that you made is, it's just who I am. Mm-hmm. Because there's a belief around there. It's just who I am. What it, you know, it's like, let's talk about that. Like, it's just who I am. When we walk around in the world believing it's just who I am.
Yeah. And I think, you know, when I reflect back on my childhood and growing up and how I'm coming to the realization that I've lived with anger for a long time, beneath that is a feeling of not being enough and always trying to strive for better and probably, you know, strive for this perfection that you can't, there's no definition behind it. Just perfection doesn't exist. And so when I think of like identity and, oh, it's just who I am, really that's just how it feels, because I've always lived with it. And so I don't know another Kim. And I've even stopped to ask myself, you know, when I started this journey and, you know, the nerves would come up and I stopped to ask myself, well, who will I be without that anger? Yeah. That's a scary thought. It's scary because it's just been a part of who I am for as long as I can remember. But I'm anxious to get to know a Kim without that anger, because I think that's where the true me lies, is underneath all of that.
Yeah. In my experience, and I really appreciate that, I got goosebumps, is like that in itself is a grieving process. And it's like when we've had traditional grief of loss of somebody in our life and we're avoiding that grief, we don't realize that the grief of losing the part of ourselves. And I think that's why I'm convinced that's a lot of what postpartum depression is, because it is such an identity shift. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say crisis. I just think it's an identity shift. Mm-hmm. I do believe in the hormonal changes and the biochemical reaction, which is just another layer. But I've seen it again and again, not only with clients and friends and colleagues, but I remember once I actually had a coach, one of my first coaches, who I would work with a lot of people who didn't have children, just mainly because I couldn't find a quality coach who was doing both and like kind of where I wanted to go. And this maybe be a little revealing secret, but I was attracted to people that didn't have children because I secretly wanted that life, not the life without a child, but learn how to integrate that energy of like individualization and identity with my children. So I'm like, okay, how does she live her life? What does she do? Like, she plays, how does she do that? But I really was craving to find somebody who could do both, which is why I try to be that now. Like, live your life, play, feel alive, and raise kick-ass fucking kids, or be proud of sorry, kids, it's up to you who you become. That's what I tell my kids. I'm like, my 17-year-old, I'm like, that's on you. You got to take your natural consequences. I said, but I want to be proud of how I raised you, how I mothered you. That's what I'm getting to. After she became a mother, that coach, she had her identity crisis. And it was interesting because she had her background in psychology and coaching and all of that. And I do believe it is such a transformational identity, like jolt for people, that I believe postpartum depression is a huge, like, in that.
Absolutely. I never actually thought of it that way, but I can 100% see that. And I think for me, that time of my life was so clouded by everything else that was going on, right? So like the loss of my father was very sudden and it was tragic. My mother having to help her, my father in the traditional sense did it all. And, so I really kind of had to teach her how to live on her own again. And my parents were self-employed. So there was a lot there for me to carry to help her through. The breastfeeding journey with my child during maternity leave was very trying. And then my company was getting bought. So there was so much going on there that I was like, I'm strong. I can do this. I got this. And it was just like, go, go, go. Just muscle through it was what I kept telling myself. And even now I look back and I'm like, I probably had undiagnosed postpartum depression. And I just didn't take the time to allow myself to see it. Even, follow-up doctor's appointments. How are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. I didn't want to go there. Did not want to go there.
And even if you did, I mean, I'm just going to point out the pink elephant in the room that you were in survival mode and you didn't have the opportunity or the privilege to even feel. And that's like that whole muscle through. I want to talk about that a little bit, but again, as a professional, when someone says, how are you doing? I'm fine. Fucked up insides, nice exterior. I think Mel Robbins defined it as that. Every time someone says, I'm fine, and even when I catch myself saying it, I'm like, why did I just say that I'm fine? Not like I'm exceptional. I actually feel really, really good. Like you can tell energetically, it should almost be a symptom marker when someone's like, I'm fine. That it's the professional's obligation to be like, are you really? Let's dig a little bit deeper, because I'm so sick of women and humans in general being like, I should have known better, because that's a lot on your plate. Like, should I have known better that I had cancer? 100%. I neglected the symptoms, but how many professionals was I in contact with previous to that? And I mean, I had 3 babies by that point, 2 midwives. And it's like, you know what? We don't actually think you have postpartum depression, but we're going to treat everybody with postpartum emotional support. Like, why? Why is that not a given? Right? So we're going down another rabbit hole and I'm getting angry, but lots. Grief already makes you numb. Throw a baby in there, having to parent your own parents and all of the other stress. The body is a beautiful thing. The brain is a beautiful thing. The soul is a beautiful thing. It will kick you into survival mode and be like, we can do this, which is why I get so fucking triggered by the statement, we can do hard things.
Right.
Because I'm like, no shit, we can do hard things. I don't think humans would be on this planet if we couldn't do ridiculous things. Like, we know what's going on in the world right now. I don't want to do fucking hard things. I want to do emotionally uncomfortable things consistently so that I can live my best fucking life, not muscle through all of these really tragic things. Yes, we can do that, but how can we do both at the same time? So I think everyone listening to this should know my values, but have you been able to feel anger and joy simultaneously in the same day or moment, where I'm like, how do you want to feel? We get to sit with how we're feeling. We don't push it down. We don't avoid it. We don't toxic positivity our way through it. What is your relationship with how can I sit with my anger and reach for joy?
Yes, I have felt both for sure. And I think a lot of that comes with just being so easily triggered. I could be having a fantastic day. My energy is in a good place. I'm in a great mood. And I feel like I'm living my best life. And then something could just so easily trigger me. And all of a sudden it's like night and day. And my mood shifts completely. It's like something just came up inside of me. And it's like, oh, here it is again. Here's anger again. And for a while, I would really criticize myself for it. I would judge myself for it. Like, why are you here? Why are you here again? Why is this happening? And now I'm just learning to welcome it in because I know it's a learning opportunity for me. Mm-hmm. And then the flip side, I have also started my day off in not in a good place, we'll say. And I've worked myself to a better place. And that's by taking time for me. It's that self-care.
Yeah. I love this. It's all skills, and I walk that fine line of the acceptance, right? It's just who I am, and not accepting that, because I come from the mental health world and the emotional health. I'm like, okay, you can have a diagnosis, you can be really struggling. And it's just intriguing to me that we can label something as postpartum when you're like, this isn't postpartum, this is grief. I think most people are struggling with grief, not the symptom of what they're experiencing. Right. Grief and trauma.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's a journey. It's a commitment.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. Like you said, it's that consistency.
Yeah. And when I'm like in a moment, I'm always just thinking, look how resilient the human body and spirit is. Like how far removed we have to actually get from ourselves in order to feel like we are dying, whether that's physically, mentally, emotionally. Like, when you watch somebody struggle for years and years and years and years and decades, and then all of a sudden there's a diagnosis, you're like, your body is fucking awesome because you just beat the shit out of it for 30 years through addiction or whatever. And just now it's like, I'm done with you. I've been trying to give you symptoms for 30 fucking years. And then of course sometimes we just don't know why things happen.
Yeah, no, it's crazy because even now I'll ask myself sometimes, and this is kind of terrible, but where would I be if my father hadn't passed away? Mm-hmm. I would have welcomed a child into this world, but it wouldn't have been with the death. And so I look at that and I'm like, where would I be? And I often wonder where my anger would be right now and if it would have brought me to this point, because my father's death really did trigger me to the point where, like you said, it just brought me to a point where I hit that wall, and it was like, enough. But I had to get there. I had to hit that wall before I could really just be open to surrendering. I'm just completely surrendering to healing and feeling, and just being present with myself.
People always say that to me when they're interviewing me. They're like, what tips, which I so triggered by, what tips do you have for people so that they don't have to get a diagnosis in order to feel alive? And I'm like, we can all tell our stories until, but when we're ready, we're ready. And what triggered for me right now is, do you know Chris Carr?
Not familiar.
So she used to be on Oprah. She has crazy, sexy cancer, crazy, sexy life. What I really appreciated is she was a younger woman. She's actually still living with cancer. It's not something that's like growing, it's dormant. And I followed her previous because she's very well known in the personal development world. She was big in green juice when that was the thing, and vegetables and food and all of that. And I followed her and I really liked her energy. I didn't act on anything that I tried to. And then it was when I got my diagnosis, it created that connection with her. And I bought her book, watched her documentary, and drank her fucking Kool-Aid, and I just did everything that she was doing. And this wall that we have to hit, again, doesn't need to be a diagnosis. It doesn't need to be a death. It could just be that last time that you're like, I've made a commitment to myself. I will never yell again. I've made a commitment to myself that I will never let my bank account get this low or my credit card bills get this high. and there's something that triggers inside of you. And as a recovering rescuer and healer and helper, whatever you want to label yourself as, or me, you can lead, but you're like, they don't want it yet. And when they do, they will pick up the tools. But until then, they're not ready.
Yeah. I mean, when I entered your world, Heather, I did that Courageous Rewrite course with you at the end of 2019. And I'm so grateful for it because it opened myself up into your world even more. But I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready then. It took for the following 2 years to really transpire and for shit to really get bad for me to really be ready.
Yeah. And I get, it's like when we just trust all the seeds that have been planted, right? The flower grows. What do you have, I guess if you had to talk to your younger self pre all of this, that spicy, what did you say? The Kim attitude?
Spice. Yeah. The Kim-tude.
I love that Kim-tude. That little part of you with the Kim-tude. What would you say to her? What did she really need in that moment, in those times?
I think she needed to know she was enough. She needed to know that she didn't need to be perfect, that she just needed to be who she was. Mm-hmm. She didn't have to strive for all the A's, and strive to be good at every sport she played, or even to play sports just because everyone else was doing it. She needed to do what she wanted to do, and that was okay. And I think that's what I needed. That's what she needed.
Awesome.
Yep.
And probably what you're doing now is unlearning all of that.
Unlearning all of it. Yes. And really striving to not hold my daughter to any standard. I don't want to repeat that generational pattern.
I love it. Mm-hmm. So Kim, where can people find you if they're really inspired by your story and want to personally reach out? What are you up to?
So I'm active on Instagram. You can find me at Running on Grit. So it's running.on.grit. And there is where I share a lot about my journey. So I'm really into health and fitness. And I do share a little bit about my personal development. I can learning how to get a little bit more vulnerable just so that I can, for people to relate with me. And I'm also affiliated with an athleisure wear company. I'm partnered with them, Savvy, SAVVI. So I do a lot of promoting on their clothes on there as well.
Awesome. Yep. So when you say running on grit, do you enjoy running?
Yes.
Do you?
Yes, I do. I never used to. Mm-hmm. I used to hate it. When I played sports in school because I had to, I did not enjoy it. And then when I found running in like 2013, I had a friend that was like, come on, just come with me. And I was like, no. And I went out with her and I don't know. I just fell in love with it. And I've been running ever since.
I have such a weird relationship with running, and I decided to sign up for a full marathon in October. I've done 2 halves in the last 8 years. Previous to that, it was always a desire. And the story, I was like, I am not whatever, because I grew up doing gymnastics because I'm flexible and that's about it. So now I'm like lifting weights and my nutrition is on game. I'm like, I want to actually do this and not just like bullshit my way through it like I typically do, where I show up to the race day and I'm like, and I just make fun of myself and hang out with the 80-year-old people at the back. So I'm like, this year I'm actually going to train for this. Mm-hmm. And I'm finding myself, I know I'm going to have to join a running group because I need the accountability and I do like that social aspect. Mm-hmm. It's such a weird thing. It's something I crave and something I resist the most.
Honestly, I think that's true. I think that's true for me too. I love it. I really do. I don't always feel like going out for a run though. And I'm, I'll sign myself up for a half marathon and come race day, I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing?
So weird.
But once you're in it and you just start running and you just kind of like let it take you. And it just, I find it so soothing. It's very therapeutic.
It's, since I've been doing all of these races, adventure things, personal development, business growth, it's all the same thing. It's just this natural rhythm. It reminds me of like surfing or snowboarding. Like you catch the wave, I will not even pretend I know how to snowboard very good yet, but like you catch the wave and you're just like, go with it, go with the energy. Right.
Absolutely.
And if people are not a runner, they completely think you're crazy. Like they're like, why do you run? Like, I don't understand. And I'm like, I don't know either, but I like that runner's high.
Oh, and the runner's high is real. You don't know what it is until you really experience it, but it's real.
Yeah. And there's for me, there's this mental connection of the resistance, this whole emotionally uncomfortable theme, the resistance that I experience in one aspect of my life, when I can channel that while I'm running, that other aspect of my life feels easier. And so I'm using those physical challenges to literally break through in other areas of my life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Maybe one day we'll run a race together.
Yeah. Yeah.
It will be a 5K and I'll be cheering you on from behind. I'll be like, yay, go Kim.
Well, you're going to have a whole full marathon under your belt.
Oh my gosh. I was like, maybe I'll just this is me trying to deflect and use humor. I'll be at the halfway mark and I'll be like, you can literally like stop now, or like, like make that right turn and you can go back, or you got to keep going. That's going to be the pivotal moment where I'm like, because I remember that it was like, you could keep going. I'm like, fuck no, I signed up for the half. I'm turning here. But I could see where I'd be like, oh, I'm just going to turn here. Like I can exit right now. That's where you make the real choices in life.
Push through that resistance. Do it.
I've said it publicly. People are like, excuse me, you said you were going to do a marathon. Well, when did this happen? I'll be like, you're too invested in my life. Please go. No, we'll see what happens. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Heather.
There it is. You just listened to the Emotionally Uncomfortable podcast. If you want to take this conversation to the next level, head on over to our private Facebook group community, heatherchauvin.com/Facebook. My last name is spelled CHAUVIN. That's heatherchauvin.com/Facebook. Also, if you are a huge fan of this show, please rate and review it on iTunes. Every review helps another woman like you take back control of how she wants to feel and become emotionally uncomfortable. I truly believe the better we feel, the more alive we become. This is how we are going to change the world. And if you've been watching me for a while, if you've been on the fence and you're curious, how can Heather help me? Head on over to heatherchauvin.com/work with me to check out my mastery and mastery business coaching programs. That's heatherchauvin.com/work with me.